Happy Sunday, everyone. Hope you're all doing great. And unless you've been under a rock somewhere, I'm sure you've seen the latest news about the new young women's age group names, for which there's been a whole lot of chatter online. We're going to briefly talk about that, but then unpack a much more substantive thing, I think, underneath that is being perhaps lost in the conversation, or at least is not a subject of conversation. First, what happened for those who were buried under a rock? Well, the First Presidency announced the names finally for the young women's groups. For years, it's just been, the girls who are turning 12 or 13, or like they didn't really have a name after we abandoned Beehive and Maya Maid and Laurel. These were retired in October 2019 as part of the sweeping President Nelson changes. And so the announcement are that the young group is going to be called Builders of Faith. Middle group, 14 to 15 years of age, will be Messengers of Hope. And then the 16 and up girls will be called Gatherers of Light. Now, these names, I see these names just as, a ribbon, the ribbons on a package. The question to me is what's inside the box, what's inside the package. We'll talk about that. First, the new names have been explained or announced with a little bit of meaning to give context to what's going on here. According to the church newsroom website announcing this, the intent for the Builders of Faith, the young group, it says that a builder of faith helps build God's kingdom through her faith in Christ, steadfast witness, and actions that uplift and encourage others. They point to Ephesians 2:20, which says, and are built upon the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone. So I guess builders upon the cornerstone, upon the foundation, we're built upon, the church is built upon the foundation of Christ and his apostles and so forth. So this is the builder of faith, the little 11 and 12 and 13-year-old girls. The middle one, the messengers of hope, for the 14 and 15-year-old girls, it says that a messenger of hope carries Christ's message of hope to the weary, speaking peace, sharing comfort, and lifting hearts through the power of the Spirit. For this, they point to Mosiah 18:8-9, that says, it came to pass that he said unto them, behold, here are the waters of Mormon, for thus they were called. And now as ye are desirous to come to the fold of God, to be called his people, and are willing to bear one another's burdens, that they may be light, mourn with those that mourn, comfort that those in standing of comfort, etc., etc., etc. So that's what they're pointing to for messengers of hope, that these, teen girls will carry Christ's message of hope to the weary, speak peace, share comfort, and lift hearts through the power of the Spirit, is what it says. And then finally, we have the gatherers of light. For that, on the church's webpage, it says that a gatherer of light trusts divine guidance and draws strength from covenants as she seeks, gathers, and reflects God's light. They point to D&C 50:24, which says, that which is of God is light, and he that receiveth light and continueth in God receiveth more light, and that light groweth brighter and brighter until the perfect day. Okay, so the stated purpose of these groups and their names, according to the First Presidency in this new announcement, is, and I quote, to help young women understand their divine place in God's work, to represent their spiritual dignity as his beloved daughters, and to highlight their progression. Perhaps part of the I haven't really seen too many people articulate this. This is what came to mind for me in my kind of observation, if bordering on kind of objection to how this is all being rolled out, is that there's no clear delineation between these groups, or there's no clear, you think of with young men, and particularly because of the priesthood, there's specific duties according to Scripture that each quorum gets. So at least in that sense, there's kind of a progression here, according to the First Presidency, to highlight their progression. And maybe I'm missing something. I have a daughter in young women, and I'm trying to think okay, well, there's nothing scriptural, there's nothing doctrinal that comes to mind about specific progression between age groups per se. And therefore, what is the progression that we're highlighting? So if someone is a builder of faith helps God's kingdom through her faith in Christ, steadfast witness, and actions that uplift and encourage others. That description should apply to everyone of all ages in both genders, regardless of anything else. We're all builders of faith, or ought to aspire to such. We should all carry Christ's message of hope to the weary, speaking peace, sharing comfort, and lifting hearts through the power of the Spirit. Like, that's not unique to 14 and 15-year-old girls. So they've chosen names and description of those names that I just don't think say, oh yeah, that's what the 14 and 15-year-old girls do. At least with the young men, again, because of Revelation and these different Aaronic priesthood quorums, it's clear, like, oh yeah, they collect fast offerings and they prepare the sacrament. There's at least a little bit of like just clear delineation, but we lack that with the young women. So what they're describing here, I'm like, but that's everybody. A gatherer of light trusts divine guidance. Shouldn't we all trust divine guidance? And draw strength from covenants as she seeks, gathers, and reflects God's light. Again, like, as I think of my daughter in the program, I'm like, oh, that's exactly what they're practicing and doing. And they're doing activities and programming and curriculum and everything that's conducive to those specific things. And I'm not holding the young men's program up on a pedestal. I have a lot of concerns about how this, has been rolled out or undermined or managed. I wrote about some of that in my Rise Up book, particularly in the conclusion, which you can go to socialharmony.org or Amazon to check out if you've got young men in your life. Now, so that was where I was like, okay, like, fine, a name is a name, right? It's just a ribbon on the package. And they chose these names, whatever. But then when they try to like give context to them with these explanations that are in, like, but that's like, some 70-year-old high priest should be a gatherer of light and a messenger of hope and a builder of faith. And every part of those explanations should apply to that 70-year-old high priest. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about background. There have been a bunch of funny memes flying around this week in response. My wife sent me this one, which was from, I don't know, what was it, like the early 2000s? There were all those Mormon movies like, oh gosh, now I'm just gonna blank and not, Singles Ward and the RM and like Kirby Hayborn and in that kind of those glory days of Mormon cinema. I don't remember which. This didn't look familiar. This must have been from one of those movies that I didn't watch, but I thought this clip was hilarious, and so here we go.
Okay.
Sons of light.
Swords of light.
Swords of justice.
Swords
Sons
of truth.
Sons of sons.
The harmonizers.
The Harmonites.
Harmonites.
Federation of Joy. Love.
The prophesizers.
Everclean. Freedom. Love. Joy Spring.
All right. Well, that clip shows three guys just kicking around ideas, and come to find out, these names were the product of counseling together with the young men's presidency and their council. And according to Emily Freeman, the young women's general president, this was a bottom-up project. This was not though the first presidency put their little signature on it to say we've blessed this and we're doing it. This was not apparently driven by them or received from revelation or any of that. It was the young women leaders kind of coming together to kick around names that could work. So here in a interview this week with the Salt Lake Tribune is Sister Freeman talking about, in particular, that point about we need names that can be translated well and reflective of not just the Utah pioneer heritage, but everyone. Take a look.
Thinking about names obviously came with a really lot of, there were so many things to weigh into that. The largest of which was translation. We are a worldwide church. And so to find names that made sense, not just here at the headquarters of the church, but throughout the entire world, took a lot of consideration.
Now, it's a longer interview, and a little bit later, she talks about the online reaction, what people are saying about it. Take a listen.
The first night, I stayed up past midnight, and I just went through every name or every comment. And Greg was like, "Are you going to be okay doing this?" And
Yeah.
And I said to him this: I am confident in the strength of the names. I'm confident, but they will be stronger if people understand where they've come from. And this helps me to know how do we teach and how do we educate so that people will come to love these names as much as we do?
Okay, so this idea that people will come to love them, we just got to teach more, we just got to explain a little bit more why we do this, and people will come to love them. I think that framing assumes that affection follows familiarity rather than substance. In other words, the more we use the names, people get used to them. Like elsewhere in the interview, the reporter's like, people are just going to use like acronyms, right? Or they're going to use short names. And Sister Freeman was like, non-reactive. And but the familiarity, right? That's not where the affection and the use and the substance comes from, right? We need that substance. These are new names. There's no new mission for the young women. The substantive young women theme, which was issued in 2019, again during the Nelson era, hasn't changed. I'm going to talk about that in just a minute because that's the critical thing I want to focus on. First, let's talk about where the substance is. As I was looking at all the online chatter, I found one of many posts that I thought were interesting. I'm going to share one of them from Yas Ephraimite on X. Here's what this person says. The best thing we could do to revitalize young women isn't in branding or structure. It is the radical idea to be honest with these young women and tell them we want them to reject the world's ideas and embrace the Lord's. It is to tell them that the best thing they can become is a wife and a mother. Then to use these programs to show them how to be competent and prepared for it. There is no accomplishment, including missionary service, that compares to the accomplishment of a righteous home wherein the next generation perpetuates discipleship. If we were bold about this, regardless of how much it may upset certain women of this generation, we could see our entire youth programs reinvigorated with purpose, regardless of names. I think this is an important point because I've talked about in past musings how if we want to grow the church, we have to be bold. We can't be lukewarm. We can't embrace the slow stain of the world. We can't appease other Christian denominations. We can't, try and flirt with Babylon. We have to be bold in preaching the gospel and in proclaiming truth and being countercultural in that sense, not trying to fit in, but actively rejecting that culture. And so to tell a young woman, today in the Lord's church, that she is a divine daughter of God, I feel like that's kind of almost the extent to which we hear in a lot of messages. You're a divine daughter of God. You're a divine, great, yes, but also that's a starting point. That's not the destination. We've made that like the whole sermon, reassuring them and teaching them you're a divine daughter of God. Again, that's the baseline. That's where we start. It's not the whole sermon. It's not the destination. The next sentence that comes after that, you're a divine daughter of God. And therefore, that next sentence is one that often doesn't get preached. But it's what divine daughterhood is for. It's for the role that the world ridicules and heaven honors. Being a wife, being a mother, nurturing a righteous family. The thing that the world rejects. The thing that actually brings happiness, as I'll share a little bit later with some survey data. Right? We should be telling girls, you are a daughter of God. God loves you. God has a path for you that leads to the fulfillment of your happiness and furthering his mission in which you'll find fulfillment. That happiness is not found in a career or by gaining academic credentials, not in a cubicle or designing PowerPoints in Canva. It's found in cultivating a righteous family, in nurturing your husband, raising your children, and building a home where Christ is centered. This is more important than certainly any of the world stuff, but even like missionary work in the church. This is the optimal, highest, best mission in the church, in God's kingdom. Moms don't support the work. They are the work. That it's most the fundamental thing that you can do. That message preached to young women like my daughter and your daughters, that is the critical message to share. That is the substance, not just you're a divine daughter of God, pat you on the head, send you on your way to be just bombarded with society's messages that are hostile to what God designs and intends for his daughters. Stephen Covey in The 7 Habits talks about, beginning with the end in mind. In some of my presentations, particularly education and parenting lectures that I give, In some of them, I have this slide that I'll share of like, what kind of kids am I trying to raise? And I put up, I want them to be curious. I want them to be critically thinking. I want them to be, kind. I want them to be resourceful. I want them to da 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 da, right? Therefore, how am I parenting? I'm on no rammy-umptum here, right? But like, as I think about parenting and what education they should get and what lessons they should learn and what activities we should do, even what vacations we should take, like having that future in mind of what type of adult I want my children to be, I then better understand how to act today because I'm operating from that bigger, better future. So often I feel like parenting is just, reactive. We're just, oh, the doctor said this, and oh, this happened in the school, and da 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 da. And we're just like one thing to the next. And so pausing to say, begin with the end in mind, what are we actually trying to do, makes for way better decisions and actions in the present. I think it's the same thing with our kids. It's the same thing in particular for today's topic with young women. What type of women are we hoping that they will become? Right? And therefore, are we sharing the right messages? Are we teaching the right things? Are we exposing them to the right practices and learning opportunities and so forth that will be conducive towards that? Once a young woman knows what she's being formed toward, what that kind of destination is, then the program writes itself. Activities help produce skills. Skills create formation. That formation fulfills the calling. If we want women who are nurturers, right, emotional attunement, fostering patience, the practice of, creating and caring for a child, if we want them to be a teacher to teach the gospel in the home, if we want them to be a nest builder, to create home, like how do you do that? Homemaking as a craft, hospitality, the practical economy of a household, like where are girls getting that writ large in our society? The role of nurturing, the role of teaching, the role of homemaking. And so that leads us to this. I saw this, oh gosh, a year or two ago, and I have a list of musing ideas, and this one never was like enough for me to do it on until the names came out this week for the young women. I'm like, all right, I'm going to combine that with this thing that I came across a couple of years ago because it's the substance. Again, if the names are kind of the ribbon on the package, let's talk about the package. And to do that, I want to compare the themes. These came out again under President Nelson, November 2019, with all these big changes. They released a theme for young men for, the Aaronic priesthood. And this isn't the annual theme where they just kind of create these little, this is like I think they still call it a theme, but hasn't changed since November 2019. And it's the more substantive kind of thing that in theory, some of them will memorize and try and inculcate. So I'm going to read the young men's theme. We'll start there. Again, this hasn't changed in coming up on 7 years. I am a beloved son of God, and he has a work for me to do. With all my heart, might, mind, and strength, I will love God, keep my covenants, and use his priesthood to serve others, beginning in my own home. As I strive to serve, exercise faith, repent, and improve each day, I will qualify to receive temple blessings and the enduring joy of the gospel. I will prepare to become a diligent missionary, loyal husband, and loving father by being a true disciple of Jesus Christ. I will help prepare the world for the Savior's return by inviting all to come unto Christ and receive the blessings of his atonement. All right. So that was the young men. Set that aside. I'm now going to read the young women theme. Again, coming out late 2019. I am a beloved daughter of heavenly parents with a divine nature and eternal destiny. As a disciple of Jesus Christ, I strive to become like him. I seek and act upon personal revelation and minister to others in his holy name. I will stand as a witness of God at all times and in all things and in all places. As I strive to qualify for exaltation, I cherish the gift of repentance and seek to improve each day. With faith, I will strengthen my home and family, make and keep sacred covenants, and receive the ordinances and blessings of the holy temple. Okay, what are your observations? What caught my eye a couple years ago, someone actually pointed this out to me, I think, at first. The young women's theme contains 0 references to mother, wife, marriage, children. It says simply, I will strengthen my home and family. Now, this is language that any sister missionary or single woman or divorced woman or grandmother could also affirm in the abstract. Strengthening my home and family. That could be very broadly implied. This isn't a forming statement about their specific role in creating. This could be their family of origin. It could be their kind of broader family. Like, I sure we can be charitable and say it was implied when they were writing this that, that's what they meant. And yet that language is omitted. The concern here is that vagueness is not neutrality. When teaching stays at this higher vague level, at the level of, be a disciple, be a witness, strengthen home and family, as the young women's theme said, the formation of that girl does not stop happening. It just gets done by somebody else, by the social media algorithm, by the, school teacher, by Taylor Swift, by the philosophies of men dressed up in spiritual language. To strengthen your home and your family is important, beautiful, but incomplete. It gives young women maybe a direction without a destination. And if you've got a compass, but you don't have a fixed destination where you're trying to go, you just have a paperweight. Of course, we could go look back in time at how church leaders have remarked on this. And to be frank, there hasn't been a voluminous amount of commentary directed specifically at the young women. There's plenty in decades past about women more broadly, but here's a smattering. You've got President Kimball, 1978, at the women's meeting, saying that young women should plan and prepare for marriage and the bearing and rearing of children. It is your divine right and the avenue to the greatest and most supreme happiness. Data bears that out. Again, we'll get to that in a moment. That was 1978. 8 years later, President Benson, to the young women of the church in General Women's Conference, he said, and I quote, "Teach your daughters to prepare for life's greatest career, that of homemaker, wife, and mother. Teach them to love home because you love home. Teach them the importance of being a full-time mother in the home." Of course, we have the Proclamation on the Family, issued 9 years after that, 1995. By divine design, fathers are to preside over their families in love and righteousness and are responsible to provide the necessities of life and protection for their families. Mothers are primarily responsible for the nurture of the children. We got Elder Ballard in 2010 saying, "Teach your daughters to find joy in nurturing children. This is where their love and talents can have the greatest eternal significance." 3 years later, Elder Christofferson, "A woman's moral influence is nowhere more powerfully felt or more beneficially employed than in the home. There is no better setting for rearing the rising generation than the traditional family, where a father and mother work in harmony to provide for, teach, and nurture their children." So, not a lot, but, a little bit. And you can definitely see with the broader societal trend of the 1950s, 60 Americana, nuclear family, white picket fence, church leaders were much more vocal in telling moms or encouraging moms to stay home. Of course, I could wax economic here and get into the Federal Reserve and the devaluation of the dollar and the fact that so many families are pushed into being dual income earners just to survive because the cost of goods has far outpaced wages increasing over time. And so now families feel economic pressure, particularly as they try to keep up with the Joneses or live in greater abundance than in decades past. And so women feel, pushed to go out into the workforce. And of course, all this is general in commentary. I myself employ a number of women, and most of them, many of them are moms. My mom was an estate planning attorney all growing up. She worked part-time out of the home very flexibly around being a primary caretaker of the kids as her focus, but she was able to still have jobs. Most of the women I employ are all, stay-at-home, part-time job type moms and stuff. I'm not, preaching anything that says, you can't have any type of productive, engaging things outside of specifically caring for the kids. I think having the side hustles are great. The question is who has that primary focus? Are kids being outsourced to daycares and to schools and so forth, and their formation being surrendered to people who don't share your values and are outright hostile to them? that becomes the issue of who has the care and the focus on raising those children. And because church leaders, I think the data bears this out, have now, rather than stay at home and, focus on motherhood, now you look at that quote from Christofferson and, where father and a mother work in harmony to provide for, teach, and nurture their children. It's much more this like collaborative thing. It's not this kind of gendered role and, telling mothers to, and just what was it, like a couple of weeks ago, the church posted that image of that guy on social media that there was a ton of chatter about, where he was saying like, oh, I'm the stay-at-home husband and I support my wife. And there was all kinds of, outcry of like, there's obviously exceptions. There's always circumstances in which people can't live up to, say, the ideal. But, why is the church specifically promoting and posting one of those exceptions? It's certainly in trend with the broader social dynamics and changes there, but that also might be reflective of why church leaders are not so much talking about this kind of gendered role, encouraging moms to have this singular or near singular focus of staying at home, focusing on the kids, having kids to start with, and nurturing and raising a family. So then the question becomes, what fills that silence? When the church, when the spiritual leaders for these kids do not give young women a particular vision of their future, if they have to go search decades past to get some of that messaging, which nobody does, and in our church, you only listen to the most recent general conference and what the current, prophets and apostles are saying. And so everything goes down the Mormon memory hole as having less relevance for your life, because if it was relevant for today's society, we would be hearing the message. And therefore, when there's silence, when there's not a lot of commentary about it, the world fills the void. And the world's vision for girls is loud and sophisticated and well-funded. You've got empowerment messaging, all the girl boss stuff. The future is female. You've got career as identity, lean in, Sheryl Sandberg, find your passion. You've got delayed family formation being framed as a virtuous thing to, be independent and financially secure. You've got so-called pro-choice framing, pro-abortion stuff framed as women's autonomy. Ask yourself this, in the past month, like if you have a daughter, a young woman, of young women age, if you have a builder of hope or a messenger of hope, builder of faith, whatever it is, right? How many secular messages in the past month did your daughter encounter telling her that becoming a wife and a mother is a worthy aim of her life? How many would you estimate? And then how many would you estimate that she heard at church? I think the question kind of answers itself. If I took this screenshot, I didn't grab the person's name, so I don't know who said it. This was on a video some weeks ago, but this person on one of my videos said, if we're really for the proclamation of the family and husband and wife having distinct roles, which work very successfully here in the Amish community where I live, then why don't we talk about that? Instead, we've turned the proclamation of the family into some anti-gay document instead of a pro-nuclear family with intact roles document. Most members of the church are too arrogant to understand what's really happening today, and that is that women are not prepared to be mothers and wives. Men are prepared for their roles. No one has any misunderstanding of what a man should be or do. That's just some guy commenting, which I thought instructive, because you do look at something like it was just in the past week or two, the Amish community was getting a lot of attention on social media because someone had done this demographic projection based off how many kids they're having, and like that they're going to be the majority population in America in the next, century or whatever it was, based off of solely the declining fertility rate of everybody else. And if God commanded us to multiply and replenish the earth, and if it is an ideal to have a quiver full of kids, then you look at the Amish who are doing something right. And you got this commenter like, look, the proclamation does have these gender roles, but we're not really hearing about that anymore in the past few decades since 1995, so 30 years. We're not really getting that emphasis anymore, perhaps because it's not in the culture, and therefore church leaders are kind of not pushing back against it. And so kids are just hearing all that cultural stuff. No wonder, right? And so young women aren't being prepared for and taught the importance of and taught to see as ideal that role. The proclamation says that mothers are primarily responsible for the nurture of their children, and yet that sentence, or something like it, does not appear in any form in the young women's theme. I think that commenter was not correct in saying that most members are arrogant. I think the problem is that most members trust the curriculum to do the work. They trust the young women's program and the young women's leaders and the church leaders organizing the young women's thing. They trust the program to do the work. But the text that we've reviewed suggests that the program, the curriculum on this point, is pretty much silent. Silence itself is a curriculum. When we don't say what young women are for, the world will. And it's been saying it since they were little. And so you get this slow stain of the world's views on women, this feminist, I'll call it a satanic influence, trying to undermine that divine destiny of that daughter of God, for her to fulfill her potential, for her to find her greatest happiness in the role that God has designed for her. And sells her this counterfeit vision that she chases, only to end up being miserable, as the data shows. We'll get into that in a moment. And that slow stain consists of, declining fertility rates, anti-natalist views. There's this whole thing on TikTok called the girl with the list. And anytime there's a video of someone complaining about their kids or childbirth or some issue, the comments get full, like, people bombard the comments with, "Where's the girl with the list?" And it's this account where someone she'll take the clip of the video of someone, a mom complaining or whatever the grievance is. She'll take that clip, she'll show like 2 seconds of it, she'll screen record her phone swiping over to a list in a notes app, where she'll then have this long, hundreds long running list of reasons not to have kids. And then she appends to the bottom whatever new grievance that is. Like, oh, I had a kid, draw on the wall, or my toddler pooped in my shoe in the closet, so she'll add like they'll poop in your shoes, so it's this long list of kind of anti-natalist sentiment. Here is a clip from that girl with the list from YouTube.
I need to talk to the girl with the list.
TikTok's
But you know the girl with the list, right?
The girl with the list.
Yes,
It's
yes,
just
the
for the
one
girl
about
with the
reasons
list.
to remain
She's
childless.
got a long list too.
Gen Z's priorities are changing drastically, and the difference between young men and young women is becoming more and more polarized. Young women are focused on advancing in their careers and achieving financial independence, and men are more focused on getting married and having kids. NBC released a really interesting poll on the different priorities and goals that Gen Z has. I'm so proud of Gen Z women right now. We have been told our entire lives, and throughout our entire history for thousands upon thousands of years, that getting married and having kids is the single most important thing a woman can do in her life. The way we have done a complete 180 over the last 5 to 10 years, this poll perfectly demonstrates how women have said "fuck you" to society's expectations and what we're supposed to do and the things that we are supposed to prioritize. So honestly, it makes sense that we rated those things last. For the first time in history, we actually have an ounce of freedom, and we get to make a choice on what success looks like for us. And unsurprisingly, it does not include our roles as wife and mother. No, we want to have fulfilling careers. We want to have money. We want emotional stability, and we want to use our talents to help other people.
So this girl is part of a broader so-called child-free by choice community online, who's very, very vocal. The slow stain includes not just being child-free, but if you're going to have kids, delaying that first birth, focusing on financial independence, right? Focusing on that autonomy. It includes support for abortion, for just, again, out of some sense of, I need to go work in a cubicle, so I'm going to, sleep around, and then if I get pregnant, I'll just kill my child, and that's caring for myself. Of course, if any guy, impregnated a girl and then walked away to care for himself, he'd be just dragged through the mud. There's a horrible gender imbalance there, but it's this slow stain is this overall emphasis on this postmodern feminist wave of not just equality with men, in a general sense, but competing with men and taking on men's traditional roles. Here is a chart of employment, which for the third time in ever, but also just in recent times, there are now more women employed in the United States than men. And of course, this has all kinds of downstream social implications of reduced opportunities for men. When women get employed full time, there are fewer children. When men get employed and can provide and care, then people have kids. But pushing women in the workforce is actually a net negative for fostering families and childbearing. So let's go back to Sister Freeman for just a moment. And this is a clip from her announcement video that she and her counselors came out with.
A sweet confirmation came in that moment. And I realized these names didn't come from 3 women who happen to be serving in this calling right now. These names are woven into the very fabric of who we are and who we have always been.
So she says in here, this is who we've always been. Well, again, the builders of faith, the messengers of hope, like that's again for everybody. But who we've always been, I would hope and expect that in there would be an emphasis on the role of mothers and fostering and nurturing families. You know, we're all builders of faith. What is particular about girls? What are the specific messages that they need to hear? What are the lessons they need to learn? What are the skills they need to gain? What are the experiences they uniquely need to have? What are the things to give them a foundation on that can help be a check against what they're being bombarded with by society? If we just pat them on the head, my 14, almost, no, what is she now? 15-year-old daughter, and she's just told, you're a messenger of hope. Like that's just, again, it's vague. It's not telling her specifically what are the threats in our world that are trying to sell her this counterfeit vision of her future in which she'll be far less happy and not fulfilling God's design for her greatest purpose and happiness in life, right? If we just give this vagueness, we're not meeting the moment. We're not responding to the onslaught of messages that she is hearing and all her peers through social media, through books, through film, through music, through peers, through everything else. And therefore, what's the point? Every once in a while on social media, I'll be scrolling past this image of just a happy family, and someone will caption that and say, imagine the propaganda required to convince women to abandon this and replace it with a cubicle. And I'll go back earlier to what I said. I don't think it's just inert propaganda or casual whatever. I think it's satanic. I can think of few better ways to frustrate God's plan than to get women to kill their own babies or not have them at all, to deprioritize family, to slow down the procreation of God's children, to deprive or at least minimize the progress of God's children being able to come have this mortal experience, you know, of violating, what was it, the first commandment? Was it to multiply and replenish the earth? There's no better way than what is happening right now in these messages being sold to girls. In 1993, 83% of high school seniors said that they plan to get married. Now it's only 61%. It's a 22-point drop in just over 30 years. Among boys, the number held essentially steady at 74%. Now it's higher than girls for the first time in recorded history. And so to that study that I mentioned, this was a major study last year by the BYU Wheatley Institute and the Institute for Family Studies. It was called the Women's Wellbeing Survey. They surveyed 3,000 American women aged 25 to 55. And they found that married mothers are the happiest group of women across virtually every measure of well-being. Nearly twice as many married mothers reported being very happy compared to single childless women. And so we have this girl boss messaging that saturates our culture, telling every girl since they were little that independence is everything and men are optional and marriage and motherhood can be postponed indefinitely. And now we see the effects of that. Birth rates are falling. Loneliness is epidemic. There's anxiety everywhere. Women are on all these SSRIs. They're all kinds of depressed. And even as they financially begin to outperform men, at least in early career earnings. They're now majority of employees in the United States. They outperform men in education. So they're competing and they're doing all these things, and yet they've never been less fulfilled and less happy. So to the Young Women's Program, fine, there's new names. Ultimately, it's not a big deal. The bigger point, I think, is the substantive gap where, the church will tell the boys, in effect, that, they're being raised to be missionaries and husbands and fathers, as it says in the Young Men's Theme. But the church isn't telling young women in plain words that they're being raised to be wives and mothers. It's like the church was doing that for a while in the 70s and the 80s and before, but then kind of the slow stain and the social backlash, and it went out of vogue, and that commentary from leaders has declined or become more vague. And therefore that silence becomes the new curriculum, and the void gets filled by society's messages instead. I think every parent of young women should ask, where in our home, where in our ward, where in the church is my daughter being told explicitly, repeatedly, with conviction, with excitement, that her greatest calling as a daughter of God, what kind of woman she's being formed to become, that is her divine potential and destiny and source of fulfillment and happiness. And that's not to say there can't be other contributions. Women can do amazing things. It's not 100% only ever, being barefoot in the kitchen. That's not the point. The point is priority of time and energy, particularly during the formative years of your children's early youth. And so if we have to answer that in our home or in the church that our daughters aren't really getting that message, then that vacuum, that void is not theologically neutral. It's being filled by something else, and I think it's satanic. So if we ourselves are not championing these roles and embracing a countercultural gospel, then maybe we ourselves have become stained. We've become too timid to speak out against the cacophony of voices out there that have just embraced this post-secondary feminist stuff in degrees, whether it's the child-free, toxic extreme version, or just seeping into all the little things where you get all types of kind of feminist views seeping into life. We can teach our daughters to climb the corporate ladder, but not how to build a home, or to chase promotions and titles and earnings, but not how to nurture a marriage. And I think it's ultimately destructive. I think it is a net negative for their happiness. It's against God's plan. And again, there are exceptions, there are circumstances, there's nuance, there's gray, there's all the things. But what is the ideal? Begin with the end in mind. What do we want our daughters to become? And how do we fortify them against just that onslaught of messaging to the contrary, deprioritizing motherhood, shaming having children, certainly many children. It's still okay to have, one, maybe two, right? But you can see the shift and you can see the slow stain. And if we don't point out the creep of that slow stain, if we don't point out the antidote to it, what the stain remover is, then our daughters are just going to embrace what society is telling them. If we don't have strong leadership and bold positions being taken to thwart that stain. Next week is almost a to be continued. We're still going to talk about women. We're going to talk about abortion, and we're going to talk about the relative silence of women on the topic of abortion in the church. I got some interesting data to show. I'll see you next week.